coding. And I see that Brian has joined the meeting, so thank you so much, Brian, for being here with us today.
So you are about to hear a ding dong, yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to gather us together because we continue to get questions from many of you about, surprise, surprise, media coding and how should I code my classes. So I thought it was really important that we try to get together and get some more of those questions answered. As we are all aware, we've had a lot of change happen, especially when we think about our fall schedule. And our big goal in this is to try to have as few changes that we need to make to our spring semester schedule once it gets published on the web as possible. And so I am hoping that this session today will help us answer some of those questions for you so that hopefully we can get things kind of in the best shape possible so we don't have so many changes once students begin to see the schedule. We continue to receive additional guidance from Minnesota State and have continued to ask them additional questions for clarification on how we should kind of move forward with all of this. And as many of you probably already know after talking with me, I have wrestled with this on many different occasions as you have come to me and asked for help and assistance, because I feel like the guidance had been changing so much that it was very difficult to know kind of how to move forward with all of this. And so I reached out to Brian and to Lynn as well. But since Brian's kind of neck deep in all of this, he's probably the most important piece of this puzzle. And as I kind of talked through some of my specific questions, some of which are coming from you guys, it kind of became obvious to me that maybe one of the tools that could be helpful is a decision tree that would help you answer simple questions about the course delivery of the course that you're looking at, and walk you through some yes and no questions to help end up with a decision about how should I code this course. So I took a stab at that. Brian reviewed it and edited it and simplified it a little bit, which I greatly appreciate. And so the first thing that I want to do today is to actually kind of share that decision tree with you and kind of walk through that together with Brian on the call, so that if you have specific questions as you take a look at this, that he will be available to answer those questions as best he can with the information that we now know. I will send out this document after the session, along with all of the recording information and then the PowerPoint presentation that we'll also talk about in a few minutes. So know that you will have access to all of that as well and be able to use this as an ongoing tool, which I really, really hope will be helpful to you in trying to figure out the how do I code this answer. And we may continue to tweak this as we learn more things, as you guys ask really great in the weeds kind of questions, which is really why I wanted Brian to be able to join us today. And I don't know, Brian, if you have any introductory remarks that you'd like to make before I share this.
No, I think we're good.
Okay. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen with you. And know that the first time you see this, it will look like a whole lot of information. So is everybody seeing it? Yes? Okay, thank you. So basically what we're trying to get at with this is to help us reach the point of what should the course be. I have some additional guidance that will add to what we already sent out when the schedule rolled, that will help you say, okay, well, now that we know this is what it should be, how should I set it up? Okay, so we're going to run through that as well. But let's just first take a look at this. So you can see you're going to start in the top left corner of your screen. And the number one question that we're going to be asking is, does the person have to be physically present to complete any portion of the course? Okay, that's going to separate a bunch of the different media codes, because we did get definite clarification from Minnesota State that in order for a course, for example, to be coded as a hybrid, there has to be a portion of it where the student must be physically present in the classroom. So let's kind of walk down that pathway first, saying that if the student does have to be physically present in the classroom to complete any portion of the course, obviously that puts us down the yes pathway. And now we're going to ask questions. Oh, does somebody have a question? Okay, so now we're going to talk about online learning. And for me, this is a little bit where it gets a little squishier, right? Because many of our classes have some components of the course that are online. And I think really what we're trying to get at from this question is new material being delivered through online learning components? Maybe is another way to think about that. So if the answer to that question is no, then you can see we're going to come here and code the course with no media code, because that course is really an in-person class. Okay. If the answer is yes, there are additional additional information being shared through online learning components, then we're going to ask, well, how many in-person meetings are required for the students to complete? Because that's going to be the differentiator between blended hybrid and mostly online. Mostly online courses can have only up to 2 in-person meetings. So does the course have more than 2 in-person meetings? If no, we'll code it to mostly online. If yes, we'll code it to blended hybrid. So are there questions at all about that pathway before we continue down the other side?
So what about if the class literally has both? So they have the option of meeting in person every day or the option of meeting online every day.
Okay, so let's go back to the top question. Do you have to be physically present to complete any portion of the course? To me, what you're describing is we're going to have flexible delivery options, right? Which means that the student is not required to be physically present to complete the course. So that will put you down the no pathway. And then I think we'll get to a lot more questions as we start to go down the no pathway. Thank you for asking that, Bev. So no other questions about the yes pathway thus far.
I actually have a question. John Temke from chemistry. I note that it says there for courses with a single meeting pattern up in the upper right corner. So as you know, with chemistry, we have multiple meeting patterns. So for instance, there's probably, and these courses would all be under the same course number. So we have some courses that where the student could complete the classroom part of the course without ever coming to campus, but they would have to come to campus for lab. But those two, the classroom component and the lab component, same course, but 2 different meeting patterns. I would be inclined to consider that to be blended or media code 9, but is that incorrect? Or is there some aspect of this flow diagram that will tell me how to handle these things that have multiple meeting times? I'll hang up and listen.
We will get there. Yeah, it seems simple to start first with the ones that had a single meeting pattern and then talk about how that plays out when you have mixtures of these avenues.
Okay, I'll wait then. Thank you.
So
The initial questions are basically the same though. Is there any component of the course where they physically have to be present? In your case, I would say the answer was yes, right? So even though there's part that you don't have to be present for and part you do, overall there is something. So you know you're on the yes side for the overall media code, but then we'll get into how to do the meeting types.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
thank you for asking the question. And I hope people will, know that this is a safe space and really another attempt for us to try to clarify things. So please ask questions. You make this whole session better if you have questions to ask them, because if you have them, someone else is thinking the same thing and maybe just too shy to ask. So I really appreciate you offering up those questions. Okay, so let's talk about the no pathway now. So we're starting back with our initial question. Are you required to be physically present to complete any portion of the course? If the answer is no, now we're going to ask the question kind of about that flexible offering, right? Are students able to choose remote or in person, meaning physically present in a classroom, up to socially distanced restrictions, guidelines, allowances, whatever? If the answer to that is yes, then obviously we're talking about a high flex course, or flex sync is the way that MSU has branded our version of high flex. So students would have the opportunity to be physically present in a classroom if they choose to be, up to our social distancing guidelines. Okay. But they may also choose to attend remotely. So that's what we're getting at with the question. And it's very interesting because as I sat down, I'm like, oh, this should be easy. And literally, I cannot tell you how many variations and alterations have come to these questions, because they seem like they should be just such easy questions. And when you start to really think about the in the weeds operational side of all of this, nothing is easy. So no, we may continue to tweak this if we still are finding that there's a lot of confusion. Okay, so that takes us through high flex. If students, if the answer to that question is no, students are not able to choose remote or in-person attendance, then we're going to ask some questions about, well, did the course move to a fully online format as a result of the pandemic? Because in some of the MnSTATE guidance that we've received, there are different ways we need to code courses if they were changed as a result of the pandemic. And following the pandemic, we'll go back to their regular offering methodology, versus courses that were not changed as a result of the pandemic and are really offered as online courses. Okay, so that's what we're trying to get at with this question. And for many of you on the call, you may not know the answer to that. So I'm hopeful that with this tool, that hopefully it will help facilitate some conversation with you and your chair, with you and your instructor of record for the course, to try to get at some of the nuance of that specific question, because I fully recognize you may just not know that answer without further questioning. Okay. So let's follow along the path that, yes, this course did move to a fully online format as a result of the pandemic. So then our question is, do we have other fully online sections of the same course that were no's to that last question, right? So they would have normally been offered as fully online, not as a result of the pandemic. And as we kind of trickle down to the bottom of that decision tree, there's some different things that are happening. And Brian, I would love it if you could kind of speak to your discussion with the provost about how to handle those things.
Sure. You want me to walk through this half of the chart? Is that what you're
Yep.
saying?
That'd
Okay.
be great.
I'll do my best. And now you can see how old I am that I can barely read that. Okay. Can you blow it up just a little?
I can, yep.
All right. So if the answer is that no, you don't have to be physically present for any portion of the course. There's obviously some different scenarios there. So the next question we would ask is simply, is it up to students though? If they're able to choose whether they want to be in person or remote, and that choice is fully up to them. Of course, when I say fully up to them, I mean, in accordance with socially distanced MDH guidelines. If we run out of capacity in the room, we don't seem to have that problem much, but it could happen. But if it's fully up to the student, then we are going to code that as HyFlex. On the other hand, if the answer to that is no, then we're going to ask, does the course, so again, at this stage you've said they don't have to be physically present, but they don't get to choose whether or not to be in person. So the question really then becomes of, well, is the whole thing online? If the whole course is online at that stage, then what we want to know is, did the course move online as a result of the pandemic, or was it always planned to be online? So if the answer, I'll think which way to go first here. Let me go the no path. Did the course move fully online as a result of the pandemic? No, meaning it was always planned to be online. Then we just ask kind of our standard questions we ask every semester. Are there synchronous meetings? If the answer is yes, then we call that online synchronous. And if the answer is no, for the most part, we're going to call that online asynchronous, but there is one more question to ask. And that is, are all the components delivered through intentionally designed online learning? We do have some courses out there that are fully arranged or have other kinds of learning that occurs, but they're not really delivered through asynchronous online content. They're delivered through other mechanisms. So I'm struggling to think of an example, of course, now that I think of it, but I believe there are some arranged things. Integrated engineering has a lot of these sorts of things. They're actually group activities arranged that don't happen in person. Nothing that requires in person, but they have to complete some learning.
Possibly independent study type sections as well might fall into that area.
Yeah, thank you. So again, that path is, no, we didn't move online as a result of the pandemic. So then it's really, well, are you meeting synchronously online, or are you meeting asynchronously online, or are you one of these sort of weirder circumstances as well? If we moved online as a result of the pandemic, our goal is not to charge differential tuition. And so the only follow-up question to that would be a consistency question. So the basic idea is this: we would like to code those courses with this code 99. So it's remote learning. We're fully online, but we moved as a result of the pandemic. If we use code 99, then we will not charge differential tuition. There is one requirement that we would like, which has to do with consistency. If you have a course that has 8 sections, and some of them were planned to be online always, say 3 of the sections were moved online as a result of the pandemic, we have the situation where we might have 2 roommates basically taking the same class. One of them's getting charged differential and the other one's not, but the classes are being run identically. They're both, say, synchronous online courses. And so that's a concern. So basically, if the question we're asking is, are there other fully online sections of this same course that you would have answered no to the pandemic question? In other words, this course that we're talking about was moved online as a result of the pandemic. We're asking, are there other sections though that were not moved online as a result of the pandemic? They were always online. So if you have this mixture situation, the arrow just simply says, please consult with me. We'll talk through it. We found in fall, there's not that many of these. It tends to be your big classes like Calc 1, Accounting 200, that kind of stuff. The basic guideline we've been doing is, if students have a fair number of choices, if there's a FlexSync option of this course, if there's an online option of the course, then at the time of registration, if they have all those options, we're probably going to allow the online differential to be applied to all sections. If they don't really have options, if everything is online and it wasn't always meant to be online, we're probably going to remove that differential entirely. But I think it would be good for us to have a conversation just so that we're consistent across campus on that. So either you or your dean or your department chair could have that conversation with me. But again, backing up, if the course moved fully online as a result of the pandemic, it's just really a question of, is it a multi-section course, and it's a mixture of ones that moved online as a result of the pandemic and ones that were always planned to be online. But if not, if there's consistency there already, just code them as 99. So that was a really wordy way to say that. So let me pause in case there's questions or if I made that more confusing than it needed to sound.
And I'm not sure if people are chatting their questions, but I think it would be best if people could verbalize their questions if you have them. So please feel free to just ask.
I've got a question on that.
Okay, great.
Exactly the situation, Brian, that you were mentioning. Everything is going to stay online, but it would have been remote, or it would have been in class. My question is, would you leave the institutional charge at online or regular? There's those two elements also above the media code, which, helps with the billing.
So the situation, as I understand you're saying, is all sections of that course would not have been online, but now they are planning to be online. Is that the situation?
I think what I'm trying to say is they had to go online because of the pandemic.
Yep.
So it would be a 99. But above, do we list it as a regular class then or online? It'd be regular, right?
What's above media code, Don? I'm not familiar with that terminology.
Yeah, are you talking specifically about the media code, Kathy?
I'm talking above that, the institutional code where you can have BBA billing.
Oh, yeah,
Instructional unit.
Instructional unit, that's what I'm
Okay.
trying.
We're gonna get into that as we kind of move through the PowerPoint. Once we're kind of done with the decision tree, we'll chat about that. And kind of how that instructional unit works with the media code. But I think at this, go ahead, Brian.
I just say, in your case, it would be a 1 though. It would be a no charge. But yes, we will get to more specific. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think one of the biggest challenges that we've had this semester, because we had so many changes and recommendations coming from Minnesota State very late, like the first week in August, they were telling us to recode our classes. And we had already made decisions institutionally here about which courses we would charge the online differential for and which ones we would not charge the online differential. And as a result of those decisions, we had coding all over the place, right? So we had things that were coded as online that had an instructional unit code that reflected an on-campus face-to-face delivery. And we did that because we wanted the charges to be correct for students in terms of the intentionality of our decisions about which courses we would charge for versus which courses we would not. For spring, I think it's really important because we have this guidance up front from Minnesota State that if we are making decisions to not charge the online tuition differential for courses that were changed as a result of the pandemic, right? That we make sure that we use the 99 code that you see listed here. And that can be assigned with instructional unit 1, which is going to indicate it's a regular on-campus Mankato campus course, and not get into the mixed bag where we have online courses that sometimes are charging the differential and sometimes are not. So we're trying to kind of bring everybody back around to the good old days, right? And when we had kind of a protocol that we could audit for to look for problems, to say, wow, if we have a course that is, classified with a media code 12 and is assigned to an instructional unit 1, wow, there's a problem there and we've got to figure out what that is. And so, part of our role in the registrar's office has been to kind of come back around and reach out to you. And many of you have heard from me or Josh or Shelly about, hey, what should this really be coded as? Oh, yep, it's online. Okay, then we're going to update the instructional unit to go along with that online media code. I think a real deficiency in our current student record system is the fact that those two things aren't connected, such that if you change one, the other gets changed as well. So we end up having to do a lot of manual work behind the scenes to try to make sure that those charges are correct. And with fall semester and everything that we had going on, it was impossible to do any of those audits for fall. So I'm very hopeful that for spring, with the information that we're sharing with you today, that we'll be kind of back on track and be able to do some of those audits to make sure that things are set up as we intend them to be. Thank you, Kathy, for asking that awesome question.
We have a message in the chat, which I think, so basically Pam's asking, she has a course that moved online as a result of the pandemic. It's synchronous. So if you use code 99, you have days and times. Will it show up as online synchronous for students? It basically will show up as, what is the term on code 99? Remote?
Yep.
And
there's two different remote teaching. So remote teaching, no in-person required is 99. Remote teaching limited in-person required is 98. So one of those two codes. So if you're saying that the entire course is being delivered remotely and there is still a physical presence that's necessary, I think we got to go back to the top of this chart to answer the very first question, right? Is the student required to be physically present to complete any part of this course? So, and we had no courses, 0 of them, set up as remote teaching with limited in-person required. So we could have asked some additional questions at the bottom of that part of this chart. But since we really didn't have any of those courses set up for fall, we thought rather than confuse the issue further, that maybe we'd just leave it like that. So if you do get to the point where, gosh, we do have a meeting that's required, they have to attend the first day or something like that, it might be worth a consultation with Dr. Martinson to kind of talk through, what are you doing? Why are you doing it that way? And is it necessary that you do it that way? And then we can help provide some guidance at that point as to how the course should actually be coded. going to stop sharing here for a minute. And I'm going to switch to my PowerPoint presentation.
And yes, Pam, the answer is the remote would indicate that. That is, you know, and I should mention, and I'll come back to this point a couple times. We did a good job this fall. You all did a good job this fall on putting information in the registration notes. I can't say that every student reads them, but I think it's important that it's there. And so sometimes when, you know, and I've used it a lot when you're telling me, here's how my course runs, if I read those registration notes, some of them really do a good job of explaining what, if I'm a student, what's expected of me. I'm expected to, you know, attend this class remotely, but synchronously with the others, or these sessions I am, these sessions I'm not. So I would encourage you to continue to use that language. We had some standard language for FlexSync that I think is good default language, and then of course can be adapted to your needs that I would encourage. But again, the number one answer is this clear to students on what we're asking them to do. And Donna, if we want to cover multiple meeting types, I can cover that whenever you think it.
Sure. Yep. Go right ahead.
So real quick, let me say, it was hard to put this into the flow chart just because there are so many different mixtures you could have of, you know, combinations that we saw of different meeting types. You might have a course that has some synchronous online meetings mixed with in-person meetings. You might have synchronous and asynchronous mixtures and so forth. The other part I should mention, I should have said when I was talking about registration notes, often it's the Veterans Affairs that are questioning how we've coded a class and whether that matches what their understanding is. So sometimes those registration notes have really helped us to be clear to the VA on what we're asking of the students. So let me just give you a couple scenarios here, but here's the way I would handle it. And I can start with something similar to John's example. Let me actually share, is there a, Don, are you the host?
Yes. I will give you rights here. Have to find you on my big list of people. Where did you
And so
go?
let me just start by, while she looks for that, saying, so we have our overall media code for the class, and then meeting types have a different coding. I think we call them meeting patterns, sorry, have different codes that we call meeting types. And so I'll pull up real quick a list of meeting types. Let's see. I have so many windows open. I got it. So I think that's what you're seeing now, I hope.
Yep.
So the meeting types, so for each meeting pattern you have, you can assign one of these codes. I think this is all of them. Either a blank, that would basically be, you haven't put anything in, a FlexSync option, what we call Flex S. Flex A technically means the students have the ability to choose both attending synchronously or doing asynchronous learning. We don't have a lot of these, but we do have, I think we had less than 10 when I saw in the fall, but we do have a few. There's of course standard in person, there's online, and then there's some other ones like arranged and to be determined. But I thought I'd just give you just a couple examples of how this might look. So here's two different classes. One is Biology 100. The lectures are online, but the labs are in person. If I can contrast that to Biology 474, where the lectures are basically FlexSync, but the labs are in person. So the lecture can be either, the student has the choice of doing either remote or in person, but the lab has some required in person. These actually get coded differently. And the way you can see that is, if I go back to my other chart, you're seeing the original chart again, right? So let me start with Biology 100. You've got online lectures and in-person labs. So my first question is, do I have to be physically present? The answer is yes. For any component, the answer is yes. There's in-person labs. does the course have additional online learning components? The answer there was yes, the lectures are actually delivered online. Do you have to attend more than 2 persons in-person meetings? Yes, the labs have more than 2. So actually that course is supposed to be coded with a media code of hybrid. But because of the mixture of meetings, it's informative to the student to break that down a little further. At least I think it is. So if you look at that document again, we're at hybrid for the media code, but the lectures are delivered totally online. So we put online for the meeting type, and the labs are in person required. So we put in person required for the meeting type. If I contrast that with the other course where, you know, these lectures again were fully online, Biology 474 has lectures that are synchronous, but the student has the choice of being in person or not. So again, if I go back to that chart, again, there's something required in person, happens to be the lab. Does the class have additional online components? The answer is no. You can, the student, this is probably not the best way to write this, but I struggled with trying not to make this chart more complicated. But no, the student actually has the choice of being online, but they do not, they also could be in person. So really the answer is no there, that they don't have additional, maybe the way to say it is purposefully online learning, the normal way we think of online. So we've decided to code that as null. Just don't bother to put anything there. And instead, then at the meeting pattern say, well, the lecture, since the student has the choice of being remote or in person, that's flexible, flex sync, right? But the lab again is required in person. So I'm always willing to be of help, I think. If you have a particular situation you want to run by us, feel free to do that. Send it to Donna or myself or both. There are other situations. These are just 2 examples. And the reason I didn't fill out the entire flow chart is it started to get really complicated when I thought of all the various combinations. But let me give you just one more example. Let's say you have a course, it's a 4-credit class. It's got 2 hours of synchronous online meetings and the rest is asynchronous learning. So in a sense, that's 2 different methods that this course is being taught. And we have seen this. The flow chart again does technically cover that. So if you go back to the flow chart here, do you have to be physically present? No. Are students able to choose remote or in person? No, the course is fully online. Did it move as a result of the pandemic? You know, it could have been either, but I suppose for the sake of argument, let's say that it did not, that we had always planned it to be this way. Are there synchronous meetings? Yes. So we're going to code that course as online synchronous. So even though it's sort of half and half, there's 2, you know, of the 4 credits, 2 of them are being taught online synchronous and 2 are being delivered asynchronously. The overall media code, we're doing online synchronous in this flow chart. I will say for the VA purposes, they want to know why is a 4-credit class only meeting for 2 hours? That's where the registration notes can really help. Ideally, you could say this course meets in person for these times. Additional online learning will be made available or will be required is really the way to say it. And we've seen those kinds of notes. So again, if you have questions on those mixtures, again, it was hard for me to think of every possible scenario. We definitely saw other cases of you know, things being mostly flex sync, but they had to come in person for just a couple of speeches in a comm studies class or a couple exams or something. And Donna kind of covered that. We hope that conversations with deans or myself, maybe we can talk through whether that's necessary and simplify some of those course requirements for the students. If a student only has to come in twice all semester, depending on where they're living, that can create some issues. So we'd like to avoid some of that, but anyway, that's kind of the standard way of looking at how we do meeting types. And I guess, a quick version of it. So I don't want to pretend that covered all scenarios, but certainly happy to take questions on that overall strategy. I don't know if that, John, did that address your question? I guess that's one.
Yeah, I think that helps quite a bit. Thank you. Until I get stuck on something, but no, I'm good.
Can we talk about Gabby? Gabby has a question. Having course meetings through Zoom does not constitute as online, correct? So that's the question. Is that correct?
If it's Zoom and the student does not have a choice to be in person, I would say that is a synchronous online class in the way our flow chart has laid out. In some sense, Zoom is the technology. The whether you're synchronous online or not is really about how the methodology you're delivering the course in.
And if you look at the flow chart, it may actually be the pandemic question. Was this course changed as a result of the pandemic? If the answer is yes, it may fall within one of the remote teaching media codes as well.
But just saying Zoom doesn't automatically mean that it was a pandemic. You have to sort of ask that additional question. So yeah, Donna's right that this could either be 99 or it could be sync online. It just depends on, it's really the pandemic question. I'm not as concerned about what the technology is that we're delivering the course with. And I'm going to assume that everyone designs their courses with intentionality.
All right. I'm going to share my PowerPoint just so we can run through that really quick. And Brian had an excellent gave me an excellent introduction, essentially, to what we want to go through here. This is the presentation that you, hopefully, this is the presentation that you saw earlier when we did the term course roll and sent out. If I can get it to move, that would be helpful. And sent out the information to you. I don't know, how long ago was that? A month ago? Let's see if I can make this move. Oh, I didn't want to do that. Okay. So we added some additional information to this. So the slides that you see here are exactly the slides that we initially sent out that give you some guidance of if it's a certain media code, what should the instructional unit be? For most things that we offer that are typically on campus Mankato campus courses, they should be tied to instructional unit 1. And what instructional unit 1 does, just as a reminder to everyone, it's instructional unit that drives the amount of tuition that's actually charged. What instructional unit 1 does is kind of charge our standard rate of tuition. So no additional differentials. It's kind of our standard tuition rate, our standard fees, everything that goes along with a normal, quote unquote, normal class. And what I tried to say in each one of these slides is for the majority of classes that are coded with no media code, we want them coded to instructional unit 1, unless you have a program that you're working with that charges a differential tuition amount that is not related to online, right? It's a separate differential tuition amount. So I know I can think off the top of my head, MBA and Master of Accountancy courses charge a specific tuition differential amount. Social work charges a tuition differential amount. So there are several of you that do have some other differential fees that get charged to students. So if that is your situation, then you want to charge to assign what you normally would for what you would set up as a regular on-campus course, right? When we think about things that are offered in the metro area, they get charged an additional tuition differential amount for metro location. So obviously we would want you to continue to charge whatever you normally would have charged if that course was offered in Edina, for example, for that metro tuition differential. Or at Normandale, there's a separate charge at Normandale, right? So if you're doing one of those things, continue to do what you normally would do. Okay, so it's hard to say that on the slide, but that's the gist of what we're trying to get at. And when we charge a 1 or some of your other differential tuition amounts, an N or whatever, those are not charging the online tuition differential. They are just charging your program specific tuition differential amounts. Okay, so that's what we want to continue to do. To Brian's earlier point, this is just kind of another example on the screen. And I don't know why I can't get the slideshow to advance when I'm sharing it, but that will basically show you, we have 3 different meeting patterns for this course. And this is essentially the same example that Brian shared with you, where, you know, part of the course is the lecture of the course, and that is delivered online. If you're setting up a course that has online components, in this case, it's an online lecture, number 1, we want to make sure that the meeting type is reflective of online because we're training students to look there. The second piece that's really important is that the facility ID also reflects online, because doing that will prevent Shelley from thinking there's a room that still needs to be assigned for that meeting pattern. So that basically tells her, we know it's online, everything's good, you don't have to worry about it. And then if it is an online synchronous meeting, obviously we need to spell out the days and times that that course will actually meet so that students understand what their requirement is to complete that course. Okay, so make sure you're listing out all of the specific days and times that go along with that meeting. If it's the lab, just like Brian mentioned, then we're going to want the meeting type to be reflective of the fact that it is required the student attend in person. So you can see for the other 2 meeting patterns, I have selected in person as the meeting type. And again, we need to just try to use these meeting patterns to demonstrate to the student what their obligation is to actually complete the course. Okay, I'm going to move down to the next one, which has to do with online. So we kind of lumped all online together, right? And so these are things that were intentionally designed to be online. They were offered online before the pandemic. They will be offered online after the pandemic. And we have 3 different media codes that we can choose from. And so in this case, for the majority of the time, unless Dr. Martinson has made a specific exception, these courses should be charged the online differential tuition amount. And again, for most setups, that will mean instructional unit R, because that is what indicates that it does charge the online differential. Now, I always say in most cases, right? Because if you are an MBA course, you have a program differential and then an additional online differential that could be being assigned. And so you may not always want to choose the R. You may choose your differential program amount. And then behind the scenes, our friends over in the Student Financial Services office then charge the additional amount for the online tuition differential. So for these courses, we want to move forward no differently than we did before COVID-19 hit, right? So code them just as you normally would have coded a course that was online in your specific program area, okay? In terms of the meeting pattern setup for this, again, most important, if it's an online asynchronous class, you need to have at least 1 record that's a meeting pattern that covers the entire length of the term, right? And that's important for FWM, for your faculty to be able to get paid their amount for the entire length of the term. And then to very clearly show that there's no specific meeting days and times, but for the meeting type, it is online. And the facility ID is reflective of that as well, so that we're not trying to assign rooms to courses that don't need rooms. Okay, so that is online asynchronous. For online synchronous, again, just as we mentioned, we would want one meeting type that's going to run the whole length of the term, that shows the additional online meeting requirements, basically, or online content that will be delivered. So what we're going to suggest is meeting sequence 1 would start at the beginning of the term and at the end of the term, would reflect online, and would have no days or times listed, because this is really the asynchronous portion of the course, where the student can go in and do that work at any time they wish. However, the second meeting sequence that you see here is the actual synchronous online meeting that is happening for this course. And so you will want to list the specific days and times. You will want to list the fact it's online, and again, assign a facility ID to that as well. For mostly online, same thing as what you just saw. However, for mostly online courses, the differentiation is that you can only have up to 2 in-person meetings required and call your course mostly online. So we have always had almost none of these in our curriculum. I anticipate that that's what we're going to continue to see as we move forward. Very few of these. Okay, now let's talk about remote teaching. So these are the new media codes that MnSTATE added, and I gave you some definitions here on the slide that helps you understand what those mean. So for remote teaching, in terms of the meeting pattern, if all of the specific meeting times of the course, all the content will be delivered through those synchronous meetings, then obviously we want you to list days and times. The amount of time that is indicated here should equal the number of hours of contact that are typically required for a course of that many credits. So please remember that a typical course requires 50 minutes of instruction per credit per week. So if this is a 3-credit course and it needs 2 days a week for an hour and 15 minutes, that's going to cover essentially 3 50-minute periods of contact. And this does a great job then of demonstrating that the whole course is being delivered remotely. It is online. The facility ID indicates that, but all of the content is going to be delivered through those online synchronous meetings. Then we have HyFlex, and this is where it gets really confusing sometimes. So with HyFlex, again, we want all of the time to be outlined here. So you will see meeting type is Flex Sync. So meaning primarily anyway, Flex Sync. You also have Flex Asynchronous, meaning the student has an option to do it either synchronously or asynchronously. But if it's Flex Sync, it must have the days and times listed, and then also must have a room assigned, because by the very nature of it being Flex Sync, it means the student has the option to attend either face-to-face or online remotely. So obviously, if the student has the option to attend face-to-face, we have to show them where it is that they would attend that class. So you must actually assign the classroom to this course. And now we have hybrid.
Donna, can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
So when you say the student has the option to attend face-to-face, does that mean that the instructor would be on campus?
I'm going to let Brian answer that question. I think I have my answer, but I want him to answer.
It doesn't necessarily mean that. We have been encouraging deans not to have a whole lot of those courses, or to at least in those scenarios have like a teaching assistant in the class. I will say we are asking, this may not pertain to your question exactly, but I'll say it anyway. we are asking faculty who want to be in that situation to work with their deans and make sure it gets approved. There's some HR implications there, but no, in general, as far as from a coding standpoint, that could still be considered flex sync because the students do have a choice. I think we saw some of that for fall. I think we'll see less of that in spring, that people pursue that option, but I could be wrong.
Other questions? Okay, I want to just get through this last little slide here. So for hybrid, again, we want to have the first meeting sequence or meeting pattern reflective of the online component that runs through the entire length of the semester. So you'll see we chose meeting type online, facility ID also reflecting online. And then for the additional meetings, what we have said earlier in this presentation is that face-to-face meetings are required for hybrid courses. And so we want to make sure that as we spell out what the days and times that that course is meeting, that the student understands that in-person attendance is required. So that meeting type of in-person is very important. And then obviously we have to have a classroom assigned to this as well. And then just as we're moving forward with finalizing schedules for spring, remember the Common Bell. I've had a few questions about that, about whether or not we're still doing Common Bell because we're not in classrooms. However, we need to keep in mind that our students are still trying to schedule a variety of classes at different times throughout the day, right? And so yes, Common Bell, the framework that we deliver those courses in, regardless of whether they're synchronous online or in a classroom, are very, very important to the success of our students being able to schedule all of the classes that they need for spring semester. So it's really important that we're following the Common Bell framework. So, and I'll send this out with the link to that as well, just to refresh your memory. And so as we move forward, if you have questions regarding media codes, I would suggest number one, consult with your chair. Hopefully your chair can provide the information that you need to help you utilize the tools we're sharing today and be able to come to a good decision. If that's not resolving the issue, then consult with the dean of your college and have some further discussion there. And obviously, if we still have further questions, Dr. Martinson is going to be our best resource to get to a final conclusion with regard to how your classes should be set up. So we have used an hour already, but that's pretty good if we got through all of that in 1 hour. I just want to open up for any final questions that folks have.
I guess I have another question.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gabby.
So if an instructor plans on just having all their course meeting dates, which for our department is about 5 a semester, be held via Zoom, that would mean that the meeting dates would be remote.
So what I'm going to say is let's go back to our little decision tree here. Oops, sorry, I got to get out of my presentation here. So question 1, do you have to be physically present to complete any portion of the course? So are you saying they have to be physically present in the classroom?
I mean, they don't have to before the pandemic.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if the answer is no, right, we were going to follow the no path, but here's the next one. Are the
Okay.
students able to choose remote or in-person attendance up to our social distancing guidelines? So do they have the choice? We're saying they're not required to be physically present, but do they have the choice to be physically present?
Okay, yes.
So if yes, now you're high flex.
Okay. What do I do in this situation? Because it happened this fall, with a few instructors. They collaborated with their students to decide how the instruction was going to be delivered. And it was either we're all on campus together or we're all attending via Zoom. They didn't want some on campus, some at home. It was do one or the other.
So when were those decisions made? I'm just curious. Was it after the course started or,
Prior.
okay? So to me, the answer to that will change the way the coding of your course should be, right? So if the decision was that, yep, we're gonna all attend remotely,
Mhm.
now we'd have to follow down the no path here and fall through this side of the tree to make sure that we know, you know, what all the answers to these questions are.
Okay.
In the good old days, right? Your students were physically present in the classroom, so it was very easy to get to hybrid.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure in this whole new environment that we live in, if that's as easy. So I think you just need to keep, literally, I go back every one of these and go back to the grid, which I will get sent out to you this afternoon. And it has been so helpful. Because I think we all get hung up in the minutia of a lot of this, but when you stop back and look at the wider view and actually ask the same questions, you can get to an answer most of the time. So, you know, based on the timing of that and they made the decision before the class started and what it may have required that you actually recode the class in a different way to be accurately reflective of what the class was doing.
So if I follow that tree and I end up at online
Synchronous.
yeah, does that mean they are charged differently then?
So, and the question is this, right? So did the course move to fully online as a result of the pandemic? If the answer is yes, then my guess is you end up with this remote teaching
Okay.
is where you're going to end up. If the answer is no, then you could end up with online synchronous. And if you land here, that's where you'll be charging the online tuition differential. I do want to say that this remote teaching is a new thing, right? I think those codes were just added in April, if I remember correctly. And we have them in our toolbox to use for spring semester. I don't know further than spring whether or not we'll be able to continue to use those. So for now, you know, we're taking this one step at a time, right? And for spring, we're going to say to use them. If as you kind of walk through this decision tree, that's where you end up. But know that we may not have access to these in the future, and we may need to be making some other decisions about how courses are going to be offered. We're hearing that in some applications that this online synchronous piece works really well for people. I've heard a lot of that from the College of Business, particularly at the graduate level, that the grad students love it and they may continue to offer their classes this way. However, at the point that they decide to do that, it may no longer be remote teaching. It may become online synchronous. So I think we just have to know that everything we're sharing with you today is what we know as of today and the very best information that we can give you. But know that things will continue to change likely, And as we learn more things, we'll certainly share more information with you whenever we can. I don't want to keep anyone longer. I've already kept you 8 minutes longer than our time. So I really appreciate you all joining today. If you do have questions, certainly feel free to forward those to me. And I am talking with Dr. Martinson regularly, and I'll continue to share things with him as well. But hopefully between what you've learned today and good conversations that you'll have with your chairs, we can resolve a lot of issues right at that level. So I will get documents out to you as soon as I can get the recording to process and posted so that I can share that as well as the tools, the presentations that you've just seen today. So we'll get those out sometime this afternoon. But I really, really appreciate you joining us today and hope you found this helpful. So thanks so much. See all your faces. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.